Thank you for joining us today for Jennifer Schaaf and Associates in our Webinar Wednesday program, coming to you live from Washington, D.C. We are uncovering each part of the DFARS, or Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement, every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern. As you know, the DFARS are the rulebooks for contracting with the Defense Department. We've been moving sequentially, so we started with DFARS Part 201 in January, and we'll be finishing with Part 253 in December. Our webinars are every Wednesday and are provided complimentary. They are recorded and can be downloaded from our website and YouTube channel, which now holds over 450 of our government contracting webinars. In the interest of time, we do not take questions, so if you do have questions for our speaker, we will make sure to have her information on the last slide of the presentation today. Virginia PTAC at GMU offers free one-on-one counseling to firms in Virginia on federal, state, and local procurement topics. Online resources and group trainings are free with no restriction on business location. If you're interested in learning more, please use the links provided to explore what PTAC can offer. Set Aside Alert provides up-to-date news, information, and opportunities for small business federal contractors. Their daily opportunities alerts assure you won't miss important sources, thought, and solicitation announcements, providing details so you can jump on the hot ones. And every 2 weeks, they deliver concise breaking news, events, regulations, and teaming opportunities. And please join the Reston Chamber of Commerce Government Contractors Council for regular meetings. Please contact Alicia Fields with the email shown on your screen if you do have any questions. Okay, and now a little bit about us. We work with U.S. federal government contractors, including product, service, and software firms. Our services range from market analysis reports to contract vehicles and compliance, and more information can be found on our website. I also wanted to inform you of a new series that we're holding. We have launched a monthly series called the GovCon Live Q&A Cafe. And this is a live webinar series held each month. And these will take place on the second Friday of each month in this 2021 at 12 p.m. Eastern. And we have assembled a group of 4 panelists who are subject matter experts on a specific federal contracting topic. The panelists will make a short presentation about the topic listed here on your screen and then take your live questions about that topic. Our panelists include attorneys, consultants, and other industry professionals, and you can sign up on our website under the Q&A Cafe tab. Sponsorships are available for these webinars. Please email hello@jenniferschaaf.com for a media kit with pricing details. Also, please note that you can use code DFARS for a $15 discount on each of these webinars. So these are the webinars that we're holding for the rest of the year. So on Friday, September 10th, our speakers will be covering oral presentations led by Rena, Troy, Andres, and Deborah. In October, we are covering set-asides with Anna, Eric, Sai, and Tim. On Friday, November 12th, our speakers will be covering pricing with Michael, Marsha, Tracy, and Jeff. And lastly, in December, our speakers Shirley, Joshua, Kate, and Brad will present on M&A. An additional reminder that you can use code DFARS for a $15 discount, bringing your cost to $20. And please join us for a complimentary webinar as we kick off the fiscal new year on Friday, October 1st. Hear from industry leaders about best practices in areas of compliance, marketing, market research, and more. Sponsorships are available. Please contact us at hello@jenniferschaaf.com for information, or simply register on our website under the events section. And now to introduce our speaker, Susan Warshaw-Ebner. Welcome, Susan. We are glad to have you here with us today, and I'll now turn the floor over to you.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Susan Warshaw-Ebner. I chair the Government Contracts and Investigations Practice Group at Stinson LLP. I'm also the immediate past chair of the American Bar Association Public Contract Law Section, and regularly advise and counsel clients, including small and large businesses and nonprofits and consortiums in research and development topics, including contracts, grants, other transactions, technology investment agreements, and cooperative agreements. I also counsel and represent clients in traditional government contracts areas, including compliance programs, protests, claims, audits, and investigations. Next slide. So today we're going to be talking about DFAR Part 235. Research and development is an important element of government contracting. As we see increasing threats emerge and instability arising, we know the government is looking to develop the next offset strategy and new tools, equipment, and supplies to carry that out. Recent DoD budgets and proposed budgets, for example, indicate that the government's looking at areas such as cybersecurity, communication spectrum matters, hypersonics, artificial intelligence, environmental considerations, as well as better manufacturing, supply chain risk management, and more. Research and development funding is also something that you, as somebody who's involved in government contracting, will really need to know about, because the benefits to the government of getting new technologies cause it to enter into contracts, grants, and other types of agreements in order to develop those. It also provides contractors not only funding to develop those new technologies, but the opportunity to showcase their capabilities in customers. Let's move on to the next slide, please. So what is research and development contracting? So DFAR Part 235 is one of those sections that deals with this. It's not the only section. Every agency has its own version of a research and development section that supplements the FAR. And there are additional guidance, instructions, as well as things that are in appropriations and authorization acts that may control and statutes. But efforts here for research and development, they involve fundamentally a number of different topic areas. As you can see here, one is basic research. Basic research is that systematic study directed toward greater knowledge or understanding of fundamental aspects of phenomena and observable facts. It doesn't deal with specific applications or processes for products, but rather it's a fundamental knowledge and understanding type of research. Basic research may lead to applied research and advanced technology developments, but at its heart, it's not usually restricted under export control laws, and it's something that many universities, for example, carry out. Applied research is the second topic. That's a more systematic study to understand things to meet recognized and specific needs. It's a systematic application of knowledge to develop useful materials, devices, and systems or methods. It may ultimately lead towards design, development, and prototyping of new processes and products to meet mission requirements. The third topic is advanced technology development. That area is where there is actual development of subsystems and components and efforts to integrate subsystems and components into system prototypes in order to conduct field experiments or tests. Advanced technology development is usually conducted in a simulated environment. That's in comparison to the next topic, which is advanced component development and prototypes. Under ACDD kinds of things, efforts there are to evaluate integrated technologies, representative prototype systems in a high fidelity, realistic operating environment. The emphasis here is we're actually trying to be as realistic as possible to test and see, do these things work? The next one is system development and demonstration. SDD programs have basically passed milestone B approval. They're conducting engineering and manufacturing development tasks to meet, validate requirements prior to full rate production. So when you have a research and development contract, you'll have the basic research, you may have applied research, and then if that proceeds, in some cases, particularly if you're dealing with other transactions, you may be able to proceed to LRIP, which is low rate initial production, and then full production. These SDD activities occur before you get to LRIP. RDT and E, that's management, research, development, test, and evaluation efforts. That's in order to develop the test ranges, military construction, or maintenance of the facilities, operations, aircraft that are being studied under the research and development topic. They also may include military construction activities as well. Next slide. What I have on the next slide is basically the technology readiness levels. You'll see the next two slides. There are 9 technology readiness levels that currently are listed in the DFAR. One is the basic principles observed and reported. This is basic research, proof of concept, simulated, as we talked about. The next technology readiness level is technology concept or application formulation. These are basic principles. They are limited to analytic studies. As you proceed down to 3 and 4, you're moving more towards looking at more proof of concept. Are these things working together? But still in the low-level technology research and development. You're not at that point where you're actually technically covering things like prototypes, research and development. It's more that initial, what's the concept? What is it I want to prove? What is it that I might be able to accomplish if I proceeded to a higher level of research and development? Technology readiness level 5, you're talking about component and breadboard validation in a realistic environment, but it is still a simulated kind of environment. Next slide. As you move on to technology readiness 6, 7, 6 is a prototype. That's really where we start seeing prototypes, where they're actually testing prototypes in a relevant environment. The idea is, for example, you have another transaction agreement. You're going to be starting at a TRL level 6 or 7, where you're testing and proving concepts of using something that may exist, testing it in that relevant environment to see if that works, maybe doing further research and development work on that model or prototype or issue, whatever it is. Level 7 is the operational environment testing. That's a little bit more advanced prototype divesting, and that's usually right before you go into an LRIP phase. Levels 8 and 8 really are, we're talking qualification, test demonstration, and then you get to 9 and you're talking low rate initial production, and then you're dealing with full production if you're going that far. Next slide. So when we want to do research and development, basic concepts when we're doing a FAR-based procurement are that we have to have an equitable and sensible allocation of program risk between the government and the contractor. What does that mean? That means that you've got to figure out whether or not the program can be conducted with a reasonable level of risk and realistic pricing. So the default typically is I'm doing research and development. I don't know what it is that I'm going to ultimately end up with, or maybe I have an idea of what I want to do, but there's a lot of risk there because I don't know how things are going to happen, and there's programmatic risk that has to be addressed. When the programmatic risk is such that you can't reasonably mitigate it, or the item that's being researched is too complex, the end product you're seeking, there's high levels of risk on whether you're going to achieve it. Those are usually the types of research and development projects that are going to be handled on a cost reimbursement basis. On the other hand, there are programs where we can capture the risk. We can figure out how to mitigate the risk. We understand what the aim of the program is. We understand how much it's going to cost to get it done. The more likely you are to be able to put that research and development project into a box where you can capture or mitigate risk, you can capture and mitigate the cost, the more likely it may be a suitable candidate for fixed price research and development. I would say, one of the things we always worry about is putting a research and development contract into a fixed price box. The government has tried that a number of times. It's sort of the pendulum swinging back and forth. In the 90s, we saw a lot of fixed price contracting to try and get research and development done in a box of here's how much it's going to cost. A12, I don't know how many people are familiar with the A-12 aircraft program that the Navy was running in the 1990s. It had started, it was to develop the next generation stealth aircraft. It was done as a fixed price research and development project. It was going to be billions of dollars. The project ran into a lot of problems. Ultimately, there turned out to be a real dispute as to whether or not the project could even be accomplished based on what was technologically feasible. There was tons of litigation. Those of you who are Charles Dickens fans, Bleak House, Jaundice, and Jaundice, where the parties just kind of litigated like crazy till they used up all the costs. Well, A-12 was one of the cases where the parties litigated like crazy, and at the end of the day, after going back, forth, on appeal, up, down, litigating a variety of issues, the Supreme Court ruled that the parties were just going to stay in place the way they were, and they were just going to end the contract as is. Nobody got more money. Nobody got money back because there were state secrets involved, and they couldn't disclose those so that there could be litigation. So fixed price contracting does have its perils. So when we talk about fixed price contracting, we also talk about, program risk. Program risk is just really important in order to determine whether you're going to do a fixed price versus cost reimbursement research and development project. There has to be a written determination by the responsible contracting official. Depending upon the dollar size, lower than $25 million, it could be something that's determined by the contracting officer. Above that, it's going to require the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment to make a determination as to whether or not this should be a fixed price research and development type of project. You need USD A&S approval before the negotiations happen, which means before that broad agency announcement hits the stands and they say this is the type of research and development contract we're going to have, there has to be a plan and acquisition strategy that's determined. Are we or aren't we going to go cost reimbursement or fixed price? There are milestones that have to be set up in order to do that. For those of you who haven't seen it, a couple of months ago, I did a major weapons system presentation for Jennifer Shalson and Associates. I believe that's on YouTube. You might want to go back and look at that. It talks about all the different levels that you have to go through in terms of milestone planning for different acquisitions. One of the key things to think about when we're thinking about cost reimbursement is for major defense acquisition programs, you can't proceed to do a cost reimbursement project until there's a written certification that the cost reimbursement line items are needed for acquired capability and in order to deliver in a timely and cost-effective manner. Otherwise, there may be issues with proceeding in that way too. Next slide. So 235-006-70 deals with manufacturing technology programs. There are a lot of different programs that deal with research and development, but this is one where we certainly have been talking a lot in the last year about supply chain risk. The COVID virus has made things very difficult to get. It's caused limits in availability of supplies and materials. The more global the manufacturing process and supply chain, the more problems we've had this year with COVID. There has been a lot of focus in the proposed budgets for last year and this year on manufacturing to bring back technology into the United States or its allies to ensure that we're going to have a secure supply chain. The manufacturing technology program is one that the Secretary of Defense establishes. There's a strategic plan that's developed every 5 years. They start developing it 4 years out. Probably takes about a year to develop the plan. And the plan basically is one where they work in conjunction with DoD laboratories and also the Joint Defense Manufacturing Technology Panel and other local activities in order to figure out what manufacturing programs they really need. Those kinds of manufacturing programs may include, for example, manufacturing processes or tools or equipment practices that would be essential to the national defense. It also might include things like repair and remanufacturing in support of system commands, depots, air logistics centers, and shipyards and so forth. These programs, when they're put in place, they need to be competed. So if you have a manufacturing technology program, it's coming out, they want to go and solve one of those manufacturing types of problems, they will issue some form of announcement. Could be a broad agency announcement, could be a request for proposal, where they're going to want to compete the program requirements, and they're also going to be asking for cost share. So those of you who have worked in the space that's not FAR, like the other transaction agreement space, you might be very familiar with this concept of cost share from some of those statutes. They all mandate that there be cost share. In this area, where we're talking manufacturing technology programs, we're also looking at cost share. And in fact, these kinds of arrangements may come out in terms of grants, agreements, or contracts. So when you're looking at this, it doesn't all have to be a FAR-based procurement, but the basic concept is it has to be competed and there has to be cost sharing. When we talk about the Joint Defense Manufacturing Technology Council, that panel is one that is chaired by somebody who's been appointed on a rotating basis from among the military departments and defense agencies that have manufacturing technology programs. There are typically people from each of the military departments on that, as well as potentially others. The panel's charged with identifying and integrating the requirements for the program. As I said before, looking to make a comprehensive review and assessment of what are the defense-related manufacturing issues out there and what are potential programs to go and carry them out. Next slide. So evaluation for award, we talked about this a little bit. This requires competitive procedures. As I said before, could come out through a BAA, a broad agency announcement, or a request for proposals. It's going to assess cost share between agency and offerors. If you're familiar with OTs in terms of cost share, you know, small businesses, for example, non-traditional defense contractors are usually able to avoid having to pay cost share. Those that are CAS-covered contractors are required to offer some form of cost share or to show how they're using, to a great extent, non-traditionals in those projects. That may be something that's considered in a particular research and development project, especially if it's going to be another transaction agreement, but cost share will be covered in some way. In addition, for evaluation for award, there is a provision in here. I don't know if many people know about this, but lead systems integration. This is the concept where you have someone who's a large prime who is basically overseeing putting together all the different pieces and parts to develop a program. So we've seen that in like A12. We may have seen that in the future combat systems. Those are huge programs where there's a lead systems integrator functioning as a prime contractor, overseeing and pulling in all the different pieces. If you are going to go after one of these procurements, lead systems integrators under 10 U.S.C. 2410P, you're prohibited from having any direct financial interest in the development or construction of any individual system or element or system of systems. So what does that mean? That means that if you're a lead systems integrator or you're applying to be one under one of these procurements, you can't have a financial interest in the work of your subcontractors. The only way that you can is if there's a competitive selection and if the other potential conflicts of interest, organizational conflicts of interest are addressed, or if you're at a lower tier operating as a lead systems integrator, having retained or brought in a subcontractor, that if the subcontractor then selects the lead systems integrator to be one of its subcontractors, that process is done without the control of that lead systems integrator. So DoD will not award a new contract for lead systems integrator functions for major systems if the major system has proceeded beyond low rate initial production. So you won't be seeing new lead systems integrator procurements where they've already bypassed the LRIP process. So if you were going to see them, it would have to be before that. In addition, there would have to be a Secretary of Defense determination in writing that it's not practicable to carry out the acquisition without having a lead systems integrator function. So those are some of the things that are holding up the use of lead systems integrators. In addition, let's say you have a lead systems integrator research and development type of contract. One of the things that it does prohibit, we know we've been concerned about, does the lead systems integrator have an interest financially in any of its subcontractors in the underlying systems and components that go into the project? If during the course of the lead systems integrate contract, the lead systems integrator plans to acquire an interest in one of the individual systems or elements of that, they have to notify the contracting officer. Then the establishment will determine, does an exception apply to the prohibition of having a lead systems integrator have a financial interest? Or can they firewall, avoid, or mitigate that? A lot of cases out there that deal with that from the standpoint of things like the FTC or the Department of Justice looking at conflicts of interest from an antitrust perspective as well. So if the matter can't be firewalled, avoided, or mitigated, and the government doesn't want to proceed, they can terminate. They actually can even terminate for default if they have that option. Otherwise, if they do want to undertake some remedial measures to address this, they may set conditions on what can be done, by whom. There may be some conditioned divestiture in the planned acquisition. There could be firewalls established. There could be all sorts of organizational things that are done to make sure that any potential conflict of interest is mitigated. Really, a development here is that on July 9th, President Biden issued an executive order in which he asked for increased antitrust enforcement. I bring that up because right after that, the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission also announced that they're going to conduct a higher level of scrutiny on mergers and acquisitions. So under that program, they actually could block a merger or acquisition or require divestiture or other kinds of requirements so that if you had a lead systems integrator that had a financial interest or was seeking to merge or acquire as part of that, those would be issues that would need to be addressed. This is particularly important in light of the fact that we're now in a position where there is a real need for research and development, and there is a shrinking defense industrial base. We want to make sure that those things are handled correctly. Next slide. Next slide. So next is scientific and technical reports. If you've done any research and development, you know there's always going to be a scientific and technical report. DTEC, the Department of Defense Technical Information Center, is the repository for all scientific and technical reports. You used to be able to go online to DTEC and pull things down. Now they say it may be accessed by eligible entities. So those who get research and development contracts, you'll see in your contracts that you get that you will be able to have access to DTEC. And the reason for that is that the government wants to make available prior research that's been done on the topic so that if it's useful to you, they get the benefit of you using it as well. Next slide. Research facilities, educational institutions have lots of research facilities. Almost every university, major university, has some form of research facility. Some are better known than others. Johns Hopkins has them. The Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab. We've got MIT, et cetera. So educational institutions are there to furnish facilities for the performance of defense contracts. FAR Part 31.3 cost standards covers how to reimburse these institutions under the research programs. Allowances, though, are really conditioned on the satisfaction of several things. In order to get paid to be assisting in these processes, the research facility has to be determined to be essential to performance of the DoD contract. It has to be existing facilities are not there to meet program requirements practically or effectively. Furnishing the government-owned facility is not practical, it's not desirable, and in addition, the proposed use of the educational institutions facility is essential to the government research. There may be something special about it that's really needed in order to accomplish particular government research. So those are things that all conjunctively have to be satisfied in order for an educational institution to get one of these special use allowances. Other key points here are how they get paid. They only get paid in the years when the government actually has a contract using the facility. That's not surprising. The other thing is that if, as is typical in educational institutions, they're doing a lot of research, some private, some government, the allocation of that allowance is going to be prorated for how that facility is being used. So they may not get the full allowance that they might otherwise be entitled to. If they're doing research for others as well, it will be prorated. It's sort of like that concept of when you're keeping track of time, unless you're full-time accounting where you're tracking every hour of the 24 hours, it's usually prorated for your 8-hour day. And even if you're tracking 24 hours, remember, you can never bill an invoice for more than 24 hours. So some restrictions on that allowance process. They will never pay more than the acquisition cost. So if they were going to buy it, then they can't pay more than that. Next slide. So in addition to using research facilities at educational institutions, we've got federally funded research and development centers, FFRDCs. These are research laboratories that DoD sponsored. The Institute for Defense Analysis, MIT's Lincoln Laboratory, Carnegie Mellon's Software Engineering Institute. There's a typo there, sorry about that. Those are all FFRDCs. One of the things that to note is they are required to have a conflict of interest policy, which covers organizational as well as personal conflicts of interest, so that if members on the FFRDC also serve on a board or as a trustee of a profit-making company, then they will have to mitigate, avoid, or get a waiver for any actual or apparent conflict of interest. Next slide. Research and development contracts may involve high-risk endeavors. I mean, for anybody who was watching a few weeks ago when we saw the launch of the spaceship going into space, you know sometimes these things are highly risky. So there's room for indemnification and limitation of liabilities in research development contracts. How much you can get indemnified, whether you are eligible for it, or how much you can have liability limited or protected in some way, really is one that depends on the circumstances. 10 U.S.C. 2354 is the provision that applies to research and development contracts. There are other provisions, such as Public Law 85804, which deals with indemnification for ultra-hazardous and unusual events. So under 10 U.S.C. 2354, you've also got the FAR clause 252, 235, 7000, and 252, 235, 7001, which deal with indemnification of fixed price research and development and cost reimbursement research and development. These allow for indemnification, but in order to have that clause in there, it's got to be authorized by the Secretary of the Service or agency as just and reasonable. So what kinds of indemnification does that provide? It provides third-party claims for death or bodily injury or property loss. It also provides for contractor property loss claims, but not lost profits. It can result from the defined unusually hazardous risk. Remember, if you're putting in this indemnification provision, it's because you have defined and identified and gotten approved. Here's this unusual hazardous risk. We are approving indemnification for that purpose. So any event that's going to occur has to be shown to tie to the purpose of that indemnification. And whatever indemnification there is, it has to be in direct performance of that contract or subcontract. Typo here, sorry about that. Where it says indirect performance of the subcontract, it should be indirect performance of the contract or subcontract. So this is a clause that will flow down. It will flow down if the government approves the use and flow down of an indemnification provision under 10 U.S.C. 2354 and inclusion of that clause at the subcontractor level. Again, if you're doing a research and development project, you want to make sure that you're capturing your risk, you're really defining this and identifying what you need to know about who's going to have that risk and where those clauses should be put. This is one of those clauses that you want to make sure that if it is accessible to you, that you do get the right to have that. The scope of indemnification is if the problem arose from willful misconduct or bad faith, you're not going to be able to get indemnification. If you are compensated by insurance to the extent that the insurance covers that, you won't be compensated, but beyond the insurance compensation level, if there are property losses or damages, those would be compensable if the clause was in place. And the other restriction, of course, is the government never pays twice for the same thing, or at least not intentionally. And so if you're being compensated by other means under, for example, that truly hazardous public law 85804 indemnification, then to the extent that you're indemnified that way, you won't be able to access the 2354 indemnification. And as I mentioned before, a request for use of the clause and indemnification has to be approved. I would also note that if there is an occurrence that arises where there is this indemnification need, the contractor has an obligation to provide prompt notice and proof of loss, to cooperate with the government. And in fact, you may very well see where there is this intense hazardous risk event that occurs, that the government may very well want to be involved and may want to direct certain activities since it is indemnifying. I mentioned before, flow down is a key component. The government will allow the subcontractor to get a flow down indemnification provision, but only if the contracting officer has given prior written approval to the contracting officer that this provision can be included in the subcontract. The contracting officer has approved the indemnification provision, and the indemnification provision contains all those restrictions that applied at the prime contractor level, as we discussed before. Next slide. So we've got other provisions. We could spend a lot of time on this, but basically I think the key points here are export control. When we're talking about different levels of research and development, you really have to worry about not just, the normal protection of information, but you also have to worry about any dissemination or use or disclosure of export-controlled information or material. And that means you have to worry about it from the standpoint of the personnel who will be able to engage in the research under your agreement or contract, the personnel who will be recipients of any of the future information on it, your technical reports, or if you want to use this in advance, all of this research and development, you need to comply with the export control rules. And that may include the ITAR, since we're dealing with DoD contracting, not just the EAR, dealing with whether something is going to be considered export controlled, whether it's going to be subject to the EAR, which is the Department of Commerce rules on export controls, or the ITAR, which is the International Traffic in Arms Regulations, which are administered by DoD and the State Department, will depend. Working with the contract personnel, program personnel, will help you identify the nature and extent to which these things will be export controlled and the restrictions that will apply. Also very interesting, when you do research and development, sometimes you may have foreign subcontractors who are involved in the research and development, or you may have foreign prime contractors involved in research and development. When we talk about export control, that gets much more complicated, and there may be vehicles in which there can be sharing of information and the development activities, but there are a lot of hoops to go through to address that. So if you have that kind of situation, not only these provisions, but others may also apply. Other provisions that you may want to know about would include acknowledgement of support and disclaimer. Those are key because you've got to make sure that whenever you're sending something out, you're writing about the subject of your research and development, you're getting approval and authorization to disseminate it, but more importantly, that you're actually making sure that you're doing it timely before the disclosure occurs, and you're including that appropriate disclaimer and support acknowledgement in the appropriate places in the documentation that you're generating. Final scientific and technical reporting. We've talked a little bit before about scientific and technical reports. Final reports are something that has to be done. That's the kind of thing that's going to go into DTEC at the end. If you have any actual or potential inventions, you may have to submit invention reports. The final scientific and technical report needs to be the repository for what have you done, what have you accomplished, are there any patentable inventions, have you proceeded to go and get patents, does the government get its government purpose license rights to use it, are there any things that you need addressed under that? So that's an important provision. There, in addition, may be other clauses that would apply depending upon precisely what it is that you're doing. And as I said before, depending upon the nature of the kind of work you're doing, whether there are more things to worry about besides export control. We've seen distribution requirements. We've seen restrictions on the personnel who can work on it. We've actually also seen sometimes research and development requires you to go outside of the United States. So a variety of provisions that may apply to that kind of research. You know, if there's battlefield research and development, you know, such as the rapid advanced prototyping we saw under the most recent wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. You know, we saw a lot of rapid prototyping to try and solve problems through research and development of experimenting with prototypes. Those also involve when people that are contractors out in the field, you know, getting permissions for them to be there, getting all of the different terms and conditions needed to have personnel in the battlefield, and addressing training now with the cybersecurity threats that are out there. We're seeing a lot of clauses now coming in terms of requiring training so that personnel who are working on these kinds of sensitive programs are aware of the risks there, foreign adversaries or others trying to access the research and development and steal it. So training in order to identify potential threats and potential reporting requirements. So those are some of the additional provisions that might be in a contract. Next slide. So in conclusion, research and development, you've gotten a little bit of knowledge today on research and development, how it may present, and some of the rules that are out there. There are many other rules that may dot the landscape here. As I mentioned before, major weapon systems have a whole set of rules on how and at what point you decide how you're going to be procuring research and development projects and how that's going to work into the major weapon system type of project. Or there are other types of research and development projects that will have specific rules like small business innovative research. Those are SBIRs, SBIR, small business technology transfer. Those are small business and academia, joint technology endeavors, other transaction agreements, technology investment agreements, TIAs, grants, cooperative agreements, and more. Public-private partnerships are something that we are hearing about in terms of the infrastructure bills that are coming out there, the need for addressing some of these advanced manufacturing needs may very well be something that we could see in the future being the subject of a P3, a public-private partnership. Those are a little bit more complicated. They may or may not be done under the FAR, but stay tuned because there is an increasing effort to see how the government can do more, get more research done, but do it without paying as much, having the contractor community more engaged and involved in doing that kind of research and development in the future. So this is an area where negotiation may be very important. Scoping out your risk will be incredibly important, and figuring out what your costs are going to be. So research and development, an important area, one that's going to be growing in importance as we try to develop new offset strategies. So I hope you found this presentation useful, And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. It's susan.ebner@stinson.com. I look forward to hearing from you and wish you all a very good day.
Thank you so much, Susan, for a great presentation and for sharing with us today. And definitely reach out with any questions that you may have with the information on your screen now. And thank you to everyone who joined us for this webinar. The recording will be on our website, YouTube channel in the next 24 hours. And please join us next week as we cover more parts of DFARS. Have a good week, everyone.